Welcome to the Brave Feminine Leadership interview series, where I get to spend time with incredible global leaders and we get to soak up their wisdom and perspective on all things life and leadership. Today, I am so thrilled to introduce Christine Holgate. Christine, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So I'm going to touch on your bio, extensive as it is, so people who haven't come across you before know who I'm talking to. So I'm pleased to welcome Christine Holgate, the Group CEO of Team Global Express, a $4 billion logistics leader in Australia and New Zealand. Christine has extensive international leadership experience in highly regulated industries at both board and executive level, including as CEO of Australia Post, leading 75,000 people through a period of growth and transformation, and CEO for Blackmores, Australia's leading natural health company, where she expanded the company through Asia and increased the market capitalisation more than 15-fold to over $3 billion. Christine has held board roles as well as leadership positions in trade, philanthropy and business advisory. Recognised in 2023 by Forbes as one of Asia's most powerful businesswomen, and by the Financial Review in 2020 as our 7th most powerful business leader. Christine brings a wealth of experience, and I'd love to welcome you to the show. And as I do that, let's get straight into your story, Christine. So let's touch on you growing up, your career story and the diversity of it, and how you kind of got to what is now, I think, your 3rd CEO role.
Oh gosh, I'm going to try and tell you a quick version. Look, when I was 18, probably like a lot of other 18-year-olds, I was probably a bit too opinionated and a bit too high energy, perhaps. But I had a difference of point of view with my father, and I found myself in London at 18 with no job, no home, nowhere to go. And in those days, no mobile phones either. So you were very much on your own. And the quick version of that is, so I really started out, waitressing and cleaning. And I came across an old lady who'd been a cleaner at the BBC for 60 years. And so she looked beyond my nose ring and my shaved head. And she sort of befriended me and told me to believe in myself and said, I cannot be a cleaner. And she nobbled somebody in the local church to really effectively, he was the dean of the business school, to make sure I got free tuition, because I fell between these gaps of, you used to get means tested in the UK. And because my parents, I didn't qualify for free education, but I wasn't talking to them, so there was no way I was going to get funded. And if she hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have gone to university. And clearly, that was a major turning point in my life.
Wow.
And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Flo. So, and I was very, very lucky, to be honest with you. And that's really where my career started. And she lived till I was in my 30s, but she was such a big influence in telling me to get over all the things I was hearing in my head and believe that I could be equal. And I think that is, my observation of working with women is sometimes we let the little person chat louder than the inner person, and we start to become what our worst fears are rather than who we really are. And that was a big point.
So we all need, did you say her name was Flo?
Oh, yes, Flo Stanley, yeah. She's exactly years older than me.
Wow, we all need a Flo in our lives. So what did you study? What were your ambitions at that stage?
Yeah, look, I studied business studies. I had to study, but I didn't have a choice because he was the dean of the business school and he was going to allow me to go for free. But I didn't get a grant, so I had nothing to live off. So we actually set up a number of small businesses with Flo, and we used her telephone at home to sort of run them. And we had a pager because there was that, there was no mobile phones then. They were like pens and they had a little bleep. And so we started this business. We basically, all the girls, and they were girls, who basically hired from the uni to go in and clean people's houses or do ironing or do domestic duties. And then if they didn't turn up, I'd be the fill-in, because somebody always didn't turn up. And we actually set up we sold the business after a few years just for about £3,500, which in today's money seems nothing.
Yeah.
But, we were both so proud. And at the end of the first year, we'd actually made enough money for me to pay a deposit on buying my first home. And I think those basic principles that you learn about setting up and starting up a small business and having to run them, even the challenges of getting your workforce to turn up and the promise and commitment that you make to customers, you learn them really, really early on. And they're still the same lessons that you have today, much, much later on in life. And, I was quite fortunate because I went from that and I won scholarships then to do, 3 postgraduates. And then later on when I was working full time, I won a scholarship to do my MBA. And, again, I do think education's a really important thing because it's something that levels you. It gives you the skills and the competencies. And no matter what happens to you, your life experience, what your surname is, what your gender is, what your color of your skin is, if you've got education, then it's something no one can take that away from you. And I think I'm a curious person, I never want to stop learning, and I've carried on studying all my life. But that was very fundamental at the beginning, and doing business studies. And it's been the perfect thing for me. I've had an awesome career where I've worked in lots of different countries around the world, work with people from different cultures, work in telecommunications for a long time, work in the media and in finance. So no, it's been an exciting route, a couple of glitches along the way, but generally I've been incredibly blessed to work with some amazing people.
And you mentioned off camera that David Thodey, who I introduced, or who I interviewed, sorry, before, brought you out. How did that come about?
Yeah, look, I was working in an organization that was going through a pre-packed administration process. And for anyone on this call who's gone through that or going through that, good luck, because you're working 18 hours a day. Anyway, we got through it, we got to the other side. But once you've been on such a big, full-on emotional journey, you kind of need to do something entirely different. So I said to my team one day, I think I'm going to move to Australia. And they said, you're mad. And so literally I phoned the chairman and said, can I have 2 weeks emergency holiday? Because I've just led a big team through this process. He agreed. I came out. Somebody introduced me to a headhunter who literally, the day I arrived, sent me to go and meet David Thodey that afternoon. And
Wow.
the beginning of my journey to come and live and work in Australia. Wasn't quite so plain sailing, and they had a few reorganizations in Telstra at the time, so the job changed a bit. But no, in the end, I said to David, look, I will come, take a job. Just promise me if I do well, you'll support me in getting a bigger and better job. And
Mm.
he did. A very supportive leader. Integrity, I think, is the word I'd say about David Thodey.
Yeah. So, Christine, I'm fascinated by we all get feedback throughout our career, or at least I hope we get feedback throughout our career. And I would love to know, can you think of feedback that maybe was difficult to hear, but you think actually was instrumental in your success long term?
Yeah. It was probably when I was at Blackmore's, and there was a lady called Verilyn Fitzgerald, and she was the head of our People and Remuneration Committee. And she asked to meet with me, and she said, I want you to stop rescuing people. I was like, what? And she kept mirroring to me a trait that I probably didn't see in myself. But, when you go to a boardroom and you watch one of your team presenting and they're a bit nervous, you kind of chip in and rescue them. And, just that. And I think a lot of leaders do that naturally. You feel a loyalty to the people who work with you. But when you rescue them, you do, in a way, take away the responsibility for them to perform. And secondly, you can't rescue everybody. otherwise you'll be worn out rescuing. And leadership calls for some tough decisions sometimes,
Mm.
which means that sometimes you have to take tough decisions on people you don't know. You don't only think they're good people; you actually like them, and so you do have to be able to separate that. But rescuing, yes, that was tough for me to hear, and I didn't like it because I thought that was my job,
Mm.
and it took some time. But now I'm in an organization that's going through a transformation, went through a massive turnaround. Day one we were losing hundreds of millions of dollars. We were hemorrhaging cash. We'd been going backwards for 5 years. We had labor turnover of 37%. And we had to change a lot. We had to establish processes. We had to change a lot. And that was a very, very different journey to what I had at both Australia Post and at Blackmores. And that meant you had to make some really tough decisions and pretty early on.
Mm.
I think if I'd still been rescuing, I probably would have needed rescuing myself.
Absolutely.
So, no, she was bang on with her advice. It was just hard to swallow at the time.
Mm, absolutely. So, I mean, let's get into the CEO roles. Your first CEO role, is Blackmores, yeah?
Yeah,
So,
proper big role, yeah.
yeah, proper big role. So, tell me about that. I mean, do you remember the first kind of period of time at Blackmores and what surprised you about the CEO role when you got there?
I, I, um, I remember it very well, my first few days there, for a couple of different reasons. One was the Australian dollar had been quite high. I don't know if you remember that 2008 time, it was like up at $1 at one point, and it had fallen to where it is today, actually, at 63 cents.
Yeah.
And, day one, you come in to run a company that manufactures things, but the component parts, while you manufacture in Australia, the component parts come from all around the world. And somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, can you just sign this off? We have to pay this supplier 20 million more than we thought because the Australian dollar's fallen."
Wow.
I said, "What? No way am I signing this off." And there was, overnight you are now responsible. And that was more than the profits they'd made the year earlier. And then by the afternoon, someone came up to me and said, "Oh, Christine, just want to let you know that the construction of this new site we were building was delayed and it had some problems with the builder. Could you sign off this variation of accounts?" And again, I'm looking at it saying, hold on a moment. And then I realized that at that moment in time, just the interest, they were taking on debt for the first time in really significant debt, first time in their corporate history. How were they going to pay for the debt? Because, in one day, all the profits had been wiped out, never mind the interest charge they were about to face. And I think there was like a dawning reality that day one, by the end of my first day in the job, the book stops with you.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter if you're day one, day 100, day 10 years, you have to make those judgment calls and you have to lead your people through them. And that is quite different than being a senior executive within a large organization. You become accountable. And Blackmores was publicly listed and did quarterly reporting. So there's an enormous pressure on you every quarter around performance.
So, I'm so fascinated by so many different things there. But when did the thought that you could become a CEO first come onto your radar, do you think?
I think, I think to be honest with you, clearly back in those early days with Flow, we had to set up our own company and get going. And I worked with other people and set up a few different companies. Actually, when I first came to Australia, me, a Jesuit priest, and John Menadue, the old Home Secretary, set up a television channel. So I guess I've always had this kind of entrepreneurial desire. I think undoubtedly, though, I knew that I wanted to be a CEO at that time when I was at my last job in the UK, when we were leading the company through a financial restructuring. And the bondholders had asked me to back a bid to become the CEO. They didn't actually win, the banks won. It's a long story about how debt gets managed. But when you've been so close to thinking that you could be running a company, it then you think, I want to do it. And it becomes an itch that you want to scratch. And what I could see was Blackmore's was an opportunity to go in and lead a company, lead it in a place where I felt it had purpose. It's in healthcare, something I believed in because I just lost my sister to cancer and we'd gone down, not just how natural treatments cure from cancer, but how do they improve her quality of life living with cancer. And then, of course, the opportunity to work with Marcus, who's probably the world expert in natural health. He's also a big believer of trade with Asia. And it was publicly listed. So I just thought, this is the perfect match. And although many of my friends were really surprised because, it was quite a small company when I went. And I think our market cap was about 150 million. But, Marcus was another person a bit like Flo. He really got you to believe in yourself and think big. And he was always the one pushing me, to be honest, like, that's great. Now you can do this. And, like the day we passed $3 billion in market cap, it was just such a special moment for me and him on our journey together. And all for our employees, because all the employees had shares. We were very much mum and dad shareholder base. Many of our shareholders have been shareholders for over 50 years, actually.
Wow.
So it was a really wonderful moment. But undoubtedly, when I left the UK and came to Australia, I had this scratch. And then when the opportunity came up, which when I was first asked to go and meet Marcus, I'll be really honest, I thought, I don't know anything about natural health. I can't be the CEO of a natural health company, even if I was very, very interested in it. And it took somebody else really to say, just meet Marcus. And I don't think Marcus wanted to meet a lady from telecommunications, actually, either.
Yeah.
But I think we met each other, and I think within half an hour, we realized we would be a formidable team. And we were for 9 years.
It's amazing you say that because I hear that story so often about, you just said, what do I know about natural health? How can I lead that organisation? I hear so many female leaders make a similar statement on their way through their career. I don't know enough about that product. I don't know enough about those things. It's just interesting that you flagged that. Is that what convinced you, do you think? I mean, you're talking about meeting Marcus, but what was it in particular you think that convinced you that it didn't matter?
Well, in the office next door as the chairman, I had the world expert in natural health. The company was full of natural health people, but they'd stopped growing. They'd had 3 years of no growth in the health industry. Well, the health industry never stops growing.
Yeah.
So what I could see was where a combination of probably my drive and passion for growth combined with, all of the employees, to be honest, deep expertise in natural health, it's like an awesome opportunity
Yeah.
where you have complementary skills. And although I studied business studies, I'd actually studied for a while a master's in finance. I never finished it, so I could add up, probably more than maybe a lot of the others. But that kind of helped too. And so we used to interview people first by culture and values. We looked for culture and values alignment. And then we looked for their skill in their specific job. So we had an incredible culture there.
Mm.
We gave profit share. Marcus had a scheme and I kind of changed it and made it available for everyone. So we rolled it out to 17 countries. So everybody in the company shared on the profit growth. And I think if you can do that, if you can align all your employees, including your frontline employees, to your own goals as leadership and share that wealth, that's an incredible combination.
Absolutely. It's the same way when I was CEO with the same thing, profit share, great alignment through the organisation. I want to know, and we won't skip totally past Australia Post, although you've spoken so publicly about it so many times. Before we do, though, I want to ask into your third CEO role now, what's different? If you contrast having been a first-time CEO with now, what's different?
Yeah, look, it goes back to maybe, the comments I said about rescuing. I think when you first become a CEO, you perhaps don't see it in yourself, but you feel a responsibility to lead on everything because actually the organization looks to you. I think while you're on your third time, perhaps what you learn is your frontline people and your customers are going to tell you what to do. And rather than talking, perhaps you should spend the beginning listening. And so when we first got the keys of this business, it had some huge challenges that I persuaded the chairman because we were in lockdown. So we weren't even easily able to go out to see all these hundreds of sites around the country. That actually what I do is set up a Teams call, a bit like you and I are doing today, and do it with every facility. It was 146 different facilities we did it with. And we got our frontline people to come and talk to us. What do you think we need to stop? What do you think we need to do to make this company grow? And what do we need to protect? Because any company has some really good things. And if you don't call those out, if you're not careful, you might change them in what you're intending to change for the good. And it was very, very consistent. We interviewed over 22,000 customers. We surveyed over 22,000 customers. We interviewed employees right across the business and totally consistent feedback. And so you could play it back really quickly, both to customers and to employees, what we needed to immediately address. And so we got the keys on a Wednesday, and by the Monday morning, we announced a set of changes, which was, for example, we were bringing home all of our customer service people to be back in Australia, where they'd been answering the phone in Manila or India. And nothing against those countries, but the services had broken down and people needed confidence. Again, they could speak to someone who understood their problem to fix their issues. And so it was the first thing we announced. Second thing we announced was we were going to fix the scanners because the scanners that all the drivers had, they had problems with them. Customers needed to know where their freight was. Really basic, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Fix the scanner, sort out customer service, and fix credit management. And so we said, right, that's what we're going to do. And my observation was coming in is that in those first 2 days, so many people presented to me, but they didn't really talk about the customer, or certainly not the receiver. So I changed the way that leadership was paid on the following Monday to say, no, 40% of your incentive is going to be based on receiver NPS. So that's not what the customer thinks of us, it's what their customer thinks of us, how well we're doing. Because the customers sometimes can be nice to you because they don't want, they know you, they're going to tell you, oh, you could be better at this, but then they perhaps mark you too generously. But the receiver never does because
Yes.
their piece of freight, their parcel, their dream, their critical medicine, whatever it is, they generally tell the truth. So that was just such a massive cultural shift overnight that receivers and customers came first.
I love that. I spoke earlier today to Tammy Irwin. Tammy was the CEO of Verizon in the US and is transitioned to a board career now. And we were talking about what surprised her in the CEO role. And one of the things she said that just sort of made me laugh, and even listening to you, it made me think of it again. She said, what surprised me was looking up, I'd always assumed that once you got to the CEO role, they knew all the answers. They had all of and it's exactly what you've just said. It's like the answers are with your people and with your customers.
That's it.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
you've got to do is be prepared. And I do say be prepared to listen because I think sometimes people, it's almost listening is seen as being soft somehow, but listen and then prepare to take action,
Mm.
not just listen.
So, who convinced you to step into a third CEO role, Christine? That's probably the question I want to know the answer to. And feel free to touch on as little or as not as much as you want with regards to, Australia post exit and those sorts of things. But who convinced you to give it another go?
I think I think there were probably a combination, if I'm honest, of different factors. The first thing is when something really awful happens to you, there is a moment, certainly was for me, where, you're trapped in that moment in your own head. And then I was fortunate that one day I woke up and, excuse my French here, I just remember waking up and saying, fuck you bastards.
Mm.
And I realized that, what had happened to me was I was becoming this person who, is feeling like a victim. I was behaving in all the ways they wanted me. I wasn't speaking up. I was being silent. I was being bullied. And it was much more than just the day in Parliament. It was the continuous stuff behind the scenes. And I thought, hold on a moment. I sat on that railway station floor at 18 years of age with no money, no job, no home, and got myself up and have worked all those years, multiple jobs to get myself through university, no favors, all the way up. And England's a pretty, tough place when you come from the north of England to be a female on your own in London to progress your career. And I'm doing all of it. And now I'm going to let one person take that away from me.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. So I didn't want to define myself by the actions of somebody else. So there was a big driver inside me that I wanted to get up. So that's the start of it. I would say, Adrian Loader, who's the founder of Allegro and the chairman of our company, he undoubtedly personally played a major role in that. We met over 4 years ago now, and I kept telling him, I think I'm ill actually. I don't know if I'm going to be ready to go back to work or whether I want to go back into this industry, Adrian. But he just kept sending folders to my house and saying, just give me your view on this. Get plugged in because you look at something, it's like a book, isn't it? You just read one more chapter and you get hooked in. And he as a person is a very, very inspiring person. He's got a very inspiring life story. So he did play a major role. But then I got offered another role with a healthcare company where I thought, healthcare, you're doing so much good in the world. It was profitable.
Yeah.
And I had to make my mind up. And then a driver who kept delivering my husband's board papers from this company kept coming to the house. And one day he came with a newspaper article saying, look, Allegro are going to buy what was called Toll Global Express then. And they need us, we need a CEO. We think you should apply. And I said, oh, thank you very much. And a few days later, he came with a petition of a list of drivers from his yard saying, but we want you to be our boss.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
So, it's incredibly flattering. But it is flattering, but it also comes with a different level of responsibility when people come and ask you to come and help them. Now, Verilyn would be say, take the healthcare job, stop rescuing. But I loved the people. I could see a massive opportunity. They'd had some hard stones in their shoes. They'd had cyber attacks, they'd gone backwards, they had big financial problems, but they weren't surmountable. And they had unique assets. And yes, it was going to be tough, but it was doable. And I thought a combination with, with myself and Adrian and another guy, Jeremy from Allegro, it just felt doable. And I've never, ever regretted it. And I absolutely love it.
Amazing. I love the connections with Veril and Adrian and Flo in terms of the impact they've had on your career at some pretty special moments. Who do you do that for? How do you do that? When you think of execs around you, are you conscious and intentional about that?
Yes, I probably am. I mean, look, even today, earlier today, I had an hour with a much younger employee who's super smart. And I personally really believe he's got the potential to be a future CEO. He's 28 years of age and he's got an ambitious plan. And I'm trying to help him prepare that plan. And it's interesting, he doesn't have self-doubt so much, but he's 28 and his peer groups will be 50A. So it's a big challenge. But no, I'm pretty sure he's going to get there. And I want him to take those lessons of believing in himself and just like flowed it to me. I want to help him see that he can do it too. It's not your age. Sometimes your age discriminates, just like our sex does. But it's not your age that will define whether you're a good leader or not.
No.
It's whether you can actually choose the best team around you and you can have a vision and inspire those people to follow it. That's not got nothing to do with age, and he's got that.
How do you, so Christine, we've talked about, and I'm thinking how clever Adrian is, not just in inspiring you, but also in sort of just feeding you small elements of things to kind of build that excitement and those sorts of things. And it's again, when you talk about Blackmores, you sat down there and you met people who were skilled and expertise, but worked out what you could kind of bring to the table. How do you, growth has been your thing that you've really focused on. How do you look at a company? Like, what do you dissect to work out, actually, I can turn this around, I can make an impact? What do you look at?
I think, first of all, I'm a great believer of customer. You have to go and look and see what do customers want, not what do you want.
Yeah.
I know too many times I think organizations think about themselves and how great their company is. But actually, I think you do have to go and listen to customers. And undoubtedly for this business, logistics, there's a massive demand. Retailers have had a tougher year. I think we've all seen that. But things are looking a bit more optimistic. So this is an industry that penultimately is going to keep on growing. So there's a massive market opportunity. Customers want it. So I think that's a really important trait. And you've got skilled employees and you've got something unique. So that is a fantastic combination when you can see a customer opportunity, a market opportunity, and something unique. But I would also say to you that this business required something quite different from, or certainly at a different level. Because when you're losing, and we estimated we were losing close to 240 million when we got the keys, and those losses were growing, to turn that around, it's like running up a downward escalator. You have to do things on costs, you have to be disciplined, you have to build capability in your team, and that is a very different leadership role. Leading in transformation and turnaround is not for the faint-hearted. So you do have to have people who are even more resilient than having gone through a really difficult experience, because you're going to need it, because you're going to be faced with things and you're going to have to make tough calls. If it was so easy, the less people would have turned it around. And I think that, for me has been a really good lesson.
I asked you before about, and you shared the wake up on that day where it's like, I'm not going to allow myself to be defined. And you also talked about, sometimes potentially as females, we allow that sort of little voice to take control, and you had flow to stop that, amongst others along the way. Do you have that little voice? Like, does that little voice pop up still every now and again? And how do you tame that little voice?
Yeah, of course, sometimes so that little voice is about things, not always to do with work, they're to do with my family. And, a very long story. My sister died, then her husband died last year, and she had two sons. One's autistic, and I'm like their step-in mother. And the little ones learned how, you know, he winds me around his little finger and gets me to feel guilty, and he does it so well.
Yeah.
So sometimes, you have that voice about, am I doing enough?
Yes.
Really doing enough? I think undoubtedly when you take something on and you've got a big vision, we're working on a big program at the moment with a big potential international partner, and if we're able to do it, super exciting. And, and it's allowing yourself to believe you can. And look, you have to believe because you're leading the team to do the negotiation. Of course, sometimes you say to yourself, I'm getting this right, aren't I? You have to put yourself in check.
Yeah.
But when that happens, you know, I, I've been being a CEO now for 17 years, actually, probably more than I've done anything else.
Yeah.
And I pick up the phone and I talk to people and say, hey, look, I've got this challenge. This is how I'm facing it. What would you do?
Mm.
And sometimes I do it with the chairman, but sometimes I do it with completely different people. And when we got the keys to here, I asked to get some advice from somebody who had run DHL Express worldwide, this guy called Ken Allen. He's known in our industry as sort of Mr. Fix-It in the world of parcels. He'd been responsible for equivalent to $64 billion, turned around a massive loss-making business to profitable. And so I asked to speak to him to get some advice from him just for 30 minutes. 2 hours later, we're still talking. And he says, I think I want to come work with you. So I said, well, Ken, no one's going to believe you're going to retire from DHL worldwide to come and work with me. So what you have to do is you have to invest in our business. So our employees know it's sincere, that you've put a green shirt on, you've taken off the yellow one, and come on the journey. And he did, remarkably, he did. Straight away, he said, right, you're in, I'm in. But then a journalist found out, and they said to me, oh, so why did you get Ken Allen to come and be your advisor? And I said, why? And they said, oh, is it because you're not confident?
Oh, wow.
No, are you kidding me? I said, Roger Federer. I said, I'm assuming you've heard of him. I just read an article by him, and he said his toughest job was finding the best coach. And he said, I went and got the best coach for our industry to coach me on the days. Like, if the best tennis player in the world can go and seek the best coach, I don't think that's a problem for the CEO of a turnaround to go and find the most knowledgeable person. But it
Mm.
was interesting how someone else's perspective on that was seen as a weakness, while I myself thought, Roger Federer does it, I'm going to do it.
Smart move. Exactly. Smart move.
And he's awesome. So,
So we've had some I think really good visible change of female CEOs, at least in the Australian landscape, with a lot of our largest organisations now run by female CEOs. But broadly speaking, when I say progress has been slow, why do you think we don't have more female CEOs?
yeah, it's a massive disappointment to me. We are where we are. Australia, we rank number one in an OECD country on academic achievement for women. Like, we're more honours graduates than men. 60% of young women under the age of 30 now have a degree. That compares to 37% of men. Like, watch out, boys. We've got incredible track records of academic achievement. But then when we get to leadership, it fades away. We rank 50th in the global index for gender equality, for economic equality. So we have a long way to go. And I'll be really honest with you, the gender, it's a great start, the gender equity pay, but it's the wrong measure. Asking, does a man and woman doing the same job get paid the same? Okay, there's a 13% difference. But the problem is we still have too many women doing part-time jobs and multiple low-skilled jobs, and disproportionately, particularly when you think about this academic achievements, leadership is reversed. You still got 82% of leadership positions in Australia are men.
Yes.
And post-COVID, I think you saw a swing back again to more men in leadership. And although we might say in our publicly listed top 100 companies, we've got 30% women directors, or nearly there, often they're the same women. So there's a few women who have got a lot of portfolios. So we've got a long way to go. And I think some of the things that have happened in the last few years, like changing the law of respect at work, is actually important. Making sure that women get paid superannuation when they're on maternity leave. Like, it was crazy. There was no super contribution. making sure that if they have, faced in a domestic family violence situation, there's help at work, there's help that they get paid, there's help that they can deal with that situation. Because when you have 2 out of 5 women suffering bullying, harassment, or violence in their lifetime in Australia, disproportionately, we don't have a great track record there. So, I will be really honest with you. Every major job I've had has been given to me from a man. My husband's a man, I've got 2 boys, and surrounded by amazing men. But we as women need to find our voice and speak louder about our challenges. Maybe we need to listen to how we're being received, but we've got a long way to go before we get to equality.
Should people aspire to the role of CEO?
Oh, most definitely. I'm a great believer if you, that saying, I think we were talking about this earlier. She can believe it when she can see it, and I think that's not just true for women. I think that's true from people with a lot of different cultural backgrounds. Australia is such a diverse country now. We've increased our population in 2 years by 1.2 million people, and a lot of those are coming in from Asia. But we don't see that in our boardrooms, in our CEOs. So we need to see more of that so those people can believe they too can get there. I've got a fabulous Sri Lankan woman who's my chief people and sustainability officer. And she trained as an engineer. I mean, she's tough as. She really is. She was a single mum for a large part of her career. But I told her one day she comes with a double responsibility, not only as she's tiny as well, a strong, incredible, powerful female leader, but also representing a cultural background which comes from so many of our frontline employees. And I think that's really, really important. She got the job on merit, and she's probably the toughest in my team, but she brings a different perspective from two different lenses.
What do you say, and I did ask you about this earlier as well, but what do you say to, you're a very visible leader, which is fantastic, and you paid a penalty or a price or whatever you want to call it, right, associated with that visibility. And I think sadly, a lot of our female politicians sometimes pay that price as well. What do you say to people who might look at that and think, well, no, I'm not going to put my hand up for the top job because I'm not prepared to risk that?
Yeah, I met with some young women recently, and they played just before when I got there. They were finishing a talk about something else, and they played Julia Gillard's misogyny speech, and then we were having this open conversation. I was on the stage, and several of them said, "But I don't want to go through what you went through. I don't want to risk that. I don't like what they did to Kelly, from Optus. I don't like what and they start pulling even Jane from Virgin, and women are judged harder or whatever." But my response was, please, I'm asking you to do it because I don't want us all to have gone through this for not your generation, then not to do it.
Yes.
And why, if you don't do it, you're letting them win. Like, you want this, it's inside you, it's yours to get. Don't let that put you off. Because there are bad days, and I've had some really difficult days, but I've had some fabulous days as well, and I've met some awesome people. And I've been very, very lucky, even through those, I was very open about suffering from mental health problems.
Yeah.
I had these post offices all around the country putting posters up on me and persuading billionaires to give them money to run campaigns to get my name cleared. So it's good and bad in a lot of situations. And what you see is a perspective from when you're standing from. But the good outweighs the bad.
Yeah.
So don't just focus on that.
Thank you for being a role model for us in those situations. Can I end on the final question that I ask everybody? And that is, what does brave feminine leadership mean to you, and do you think it needs to change?
Well, I think because there are so few women, I guess a lot of women probably, there is an element of courage that comes with standing up and leading, particularly when it feels a bit like tall poppy. You're more likely to have your head knocked off. So I guess there is an element of that. But I would like it to be that we could just be accepted for who we are and the outcomes that we deliver. You know, I was thinking earlier when, before we started talking together, if I had to think of a brave female leader, who would I say it would be? And there's people like you said, Julia Gillard or Julie Bishop, from politics or leaders. But I'm going to choose a different one if that's okay. And one thing I do is I love sport. And there's an amazing young woman called Sarah Walsh. If you haven't met her, you really must get her on your podcast. She is in charge of Football Australia for women. And just a couple of months out from the Women's World Cup in 2023, the FIFA, we didn't have a media partner. And here she is. She's like responsible, really. She's the person responsible for the FIFA Women's World Cup. She's in charge of Women Football Australia, no media partner, struggling to get sponsors, the whole thing. And yet she's going to be hosting the world. And she just took it on. And she, the England-Australia game was more television watched than any other event in the history of our country, 50% greater than the last watched most television event. And FIFA told me in the end it was watched by nearly 3 billion people.
Wow.
Certainly by over 2 billion. So 1 in 3 people in the world watch England play Australia in the Women's World Cup. This is women playing football. She doesn't really, I think, realize what she did. But, the Matildas changed it for girls in Australia.
Absolutely.
The whole event changed it for girls around the world. That we could put a jumper on and we could go out there and play. We could score goals. And actually we could be supported by whole families, not just by women, just the same as anybody else. And that's equality. And that's what a few weeks out, it looked a very different story, but she pulled it off. And I think that's courage for me.
Brilliant. Christine, I want to thank you so much for joining me. And I just keep thinking to myself, may we all be so lucky to find a flow at some point in our careers, but also be a flow. What an amazing, amazing leader to have come across so early in your career.
The thing that was so special about Flo, she lived in a council flat, 3 floors up, no lift. She was 60 years older than me. She had been a cleaner at the BBC. So this, I think most people that come to us, and I'm sure they come to you all the time, will you be my mentor? And they expect us to recommend people who lead. But the most important mentor to me was this lady who'd been a cleaner at the BBC. And why? Because she got me to believe in myself. And I think that's the core of it. That's the core of it. We're all, we can do things just the same as others. We've just got to empower ourselves more than anybody to go off and do it.
Amazing to have you join me. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you very much.